Now, when we start with inequalities, and we've done some of this already, we've done the stuff with the arrows, kind of messed with that some. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get some that are a little bit bigger. And I shouldn't be hearing music right now because, well, A, it's hard to hear me then, and B, that's just kind of not polite. But on a second hand with that, just some reminders here at the top to try and help us out. I've got to make sure all my x's are on one side. If I have more than one, I won't always. Then we're going to try to graph it. We'll talk about that when we get there, but this is the biggie. If you multiply or divide both sides by a negative to solve for x, we've got to flip the arrow, because otherwise we get the wrong half of the answer. So all we've got to do when we get down here, is work on getting my x by itself. So to do that, what I'm going to want to do, what's the opposite of plus and 11 to something? Minus. Does it have different colors? Okay. So here, so once we minus that 11, don't lose your arrow. Don't turn your arrow into an equals. Don't have it morph over. So x is going to be greater than 5. Now here's what I've got to remember as far as graphing goes. If I just have greater than or less than, I'm going to signify that by using an open circle, okay? Because that means that particular number doesn't get included in my answer. But if there's a line underneath, if there's an or equals to, then I'm going to use a closed dot to kind of show that. It's my way of communicating on the inequality. Now here's the thing that's a little trickier for some of you. When my arrow is eating my x, okay? So if it's like this, or if it's like this, okay, that's greater than. The numbers are going to get bigger. Okay, typically we're going to draw an arrow that goes to the right then. And I'll do the other one when we get to it, so we don't get confused right now. This is a greater than. X is greater than 5. The numbers are going to get bigger. So here's one where the circle's at 5, and the arrow's got numbers that are getting bigger. So it would match up with my graph C. And again, this is nice because if you're even doing your own graphing, you're going to have a good example to kind of look at. When we're doing any of these, I do my opposite to get my x by itself. And then again, now this time the arrow's not eating x, it's pointing at it. So if my arrow's pointing at x, or if my x was on the other side, it may look like this. That's going to be less than, and the arrow is going to be pointing to the left. So there's two parts to this I have to pay attention to. Is my circle going to be open or closed? Well, here it's going to be open. And then exactly. And it's going to the left because it's less than. It's E. I absolutely agree with you. Nicely done. So whenever I'm doing these, all I really have to pay attention to is the one step to undo what's with x. So let's see. Is my dot going to be open or closed on this one?
Open, closed.
Closed, because it's got the or equal to, and it's A because it's closed on -5, and less than goes to the left. Nicely done. So you're like, okay, Harty, I kind of see where you're going here. I keep undoing, and we do this well, and this is our expertise. But yep, closed circle, greater than goes to the right. And then D just by process of elimination. Because we like using common sense to make life easier. So nothing too bad going as far as that goes. So you're like, okay, but those are easy ones. The ones down below do not look as easy. Well, maybe they're not. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. So I'm going to look at my reminders at the top of the page. It says get all the x's to one side. Okay, so, or n's in this case, I have 2 of them. I like to keep all my variables on the left, because then the arrow can kind of help me. So how do I undo this minus 2n? Plus. All right, 10n minus 10 is less than 6.
And you minus 6? No.
I want to work now on getting my n by itself.
Oh, add 10.
Add 10. So you guys are capable of such good things. That's why I harass you as much as I do. And you can get decimals with these, or fractions. It's true, it's true. What's my last step gonna be? Okay, divide. And if I divide and I get a decimal, and I will in this case, that's okay. What's that? Yep. And I'm not worried so much about check your solution, because that gets into a whole bunch of different issues. So we'll even do this, so we're not tempted. Now, these may take different forms. They may not always be a variable on each side. Sometimes it's fractions, sometimes it's distribute, but let's kind of mess with some of these. Again, I want to keep moving them to the left. So I'm going to undo this plus 8n, because it's just easier to think about the graphs when they're all to this side. I like to always get my variables to the left side, because then it's easier to graph them. Because I can just follow the arrow then. Because once I get them all to one side, I can just work on getting it by itself. What do I need to do next? Minus the 12. Now, here's the part we haven't talked about yet. We have before, but not today. What's my last step since I'm multiplying n by negative 2? How do I undo multiply? Divide. Now, if it's dividing by a negative, which it is in this case, yep, we've got to flip the arrow around. Okay, so just a reminder, if I divide by a negative, I have to flip the arrow. If I don't, I'm going to get the wrong half of the answer. If I divide by a negative, which is what I did here, I have to flip the arrow around. So now instead of the arrow going to the left, the arrow is going to the right. But again, that's all I'm doing on these. Now again, you're like, 8 doesn't look like these. You're right. Here, my first job is to get the negative 3x plus 6 by itself. How do I get the 2 out of there? Times 2. Okay, so we're going to times by 2. All my x's are on the left. I like that. Minus the 6 because I want to get x alone. And I undo the plus 6 by doing that. Oh, here comes the negative again. Divide by negative 3. And what's the other thing I got to remember to do here? Yeah, just like here. And I flipped my arrow the other way. So really the only difference between these and the multi-step equations we've done is occasionally I've got some messing to do with my arrow. But otherwise, it's not going to really be that big of a deal. Now, when I go to start looking at some more of these, because we're going to start getting some of the graphs back in here, we're going to work a little bit with that too. So let me take a second here. Let me flip over. So when I get back here, we're going to do a couple more of these. Let me find a couple of specific ones for us to work with. We're going to look at 9 and 10, and then we're going to look at the big doozy with 13. And then I'm going to help you with some of the homework ones. Now, if you have multiple terms that have the variable, and they're on the same side, notice they're on the same side of the arrow this time, they're not on opposites. We combine those, but I have to pay attention to the signs. So when I'm doing this, for instance here, I've got 9 and I've got minus or negative 24. So I can go ahead and put those together. Yep. And my job now is to get the 15n by itself. Last step. Okay, and again we're dividing by a negative. Flip it and write my answer. And the only other thing really I can throw at you is some distributive property stuff. Now this is something we've struggled with on the quizzes a little bit. So I want to kind of reinforce this. When you see the parentheses, when you distribute, that means you're multiplying times both things inside the parentheses, not just the first one. So 3 times d is 3d, and most of you do a good job with that, but it's that second one that gets you. Yeah, negative 6. 3 times minus 2 or negative 2 is negative 6. And now it kind of looks like number 9 did. These are on the same side of the equals. That's a good thing. 3d, take away 2. Again, I'm not doing opposites. Is 1d minus 6, and then right. Once I get that by itself, and it's already just d, that's kind of nice. Now, there is one thing I want to do with 9 and 10 though, especially since they came out nice like this. We're going to do a quick graph sketch on these. I know. Put my number in the middle here. Okay. When I go to graph these, okay, a couple of things I want to keep in mind. That just less than, there's no line underneath, means I'm going to have an open dot on that number, so an open dot on my 3. And since the arrow is pointing left, it's pointing at my n, that's less than. Well, which direction of the value is getting less? To the left, because my numbers are getting smaller. So I just put my arrow that way, and I'm good. It kind of matches up with this. That's the other reason I like having my variable on the left, because then I can basically just match the arrow. Now my other one, most of the time you'll have the graph part here given to you, but we'll write our own in. Again, it's the same 2 questions. Okay, I don't have a line underneath, which means my dot's going to be open on 22. And my arrow is eating D, and it's also pointing right. So I just have my arrow go to the right. So I can follow what's going on with those. Now the last one's the big doozy. You're like, holy cow, there's distributing and all sorts of stuff going on. So I'm just going to take it a piece at a time. I don't have to do anything on the left, so I'll leave that alone. And again, when you're distributing, multiply to both parts inside. So 2n, 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. And again, when I distribute here, it's a negative 2 that I'm distributing. Negative 2.
Negative 2.
Close. No.
Positive 2n.
Positive 2n. Because negative times negative is positive. Now there's all sorts of stuff going on here. Because now, I'm looking on this right side and I see n's that are alike on the same side of the arrow. Notice I'm not doing that with my 3n yet. So that's 4n. I also notice that I've got two numbers that I can put together on this side. If I owe somebody $8 and I borrow two more, now I owe them 10. And now it's a little more like the ones we've been doing. So it took a couple of steps to get there, but we got there. Now again, I like getting all of my n's to the left. So I'm going to minus the 4, because that's a positive 4n. I want to do the opposite to undo it. So negative 1n plus 8. Don't lose that arrow. Do not let it turn into an equals. There's no morphing. Yep. And now I just want to get my n by itself. So I'm going to minus the 8. And most of your problems are not going to be anywhere near this long. It just kind of lets us get everything in here. Holy cow. Last step. Divide by a negative, and I got to flip the arrow. And again, if I were to graph it, get a few numbers in here. Again, I'm going to just ask myself the same two questions. What type of dot am I going to use, and what way is my arrow going to go? Well, since I've got the line underneath this time, that means I'm going to have a closed dot at my value. Goes to the right. And I'm good to go. So, what we're going to do then is we're going to use the examples on here if we need them to work on some of the problems on this sheet. And the one tomorrow is just going to be a mixture of the absolute value ones we were doing yesterday and these multi-steppers we're doing today. So let me pull this out of the way, because I want to make sure we get the notes out of the way. We got to do a couple of homework problems here before I lose you. So again, this guy is going to be assignment number 2 in the next homework check. Speaking of, I only got a couple in yesterday. Some of you need to get me a homework check. I know. Oh dear. So, what we're going to do on these, and I wish in retrospect I'd have spaced this better, because I really need to write under here, don't I? Oh well, we'll make it work. So let's see here. I look and I'm like, okay, I got like terms I can put together, because that's like a 1k. So I'm going to work down here. So 1 plus 4 gives me 5k, and then the minus 1, because I don't have any other numbers over here that I can put together. And then I'm just going to work on getting my k by itself. So I got to undo the minus 1. What's my last step going to be? Divide. Now, here's one thing I want you to do. And watch this carefully. I don't like having my variable on the right side. That's not a good thing necessarily. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to switch where these are at. I'm going to put the k on the left and the negative 1 on the right. But in order to do that, I got to flip the arrow. So this is what I want to graph. So I got the same two questions I've had on all these so far. Is my dot on negative 1 going to be open or closed? Open. I agree. And if k is less than negative 1, which way is my arrow going to go? To the left. So on any of these that we're doing, so let's see. I want to find one that's really nasty. Ooh, 5. That looks pretty yucky. Move down here a bit. 5 just because of the big numbers and some distributing. So let's fix this up. Okay, distributing comes first. So negative 6 times 7 is negative 42. What happens when I do negative times negative? Yeah, so negative 6 times negative 5 is positive 30. I don't distribute to the 4n, it's not in the parentheses. So I go, okay, or do I have any like terms that are on the same side of my arrow? I do. Close. Yes. I owe somebody 42 bucks. I pay him 4 back. Now I only owe him 38. Nicely done. And now it's kind of similar to the last one we were doing. I want to get my n by itself. I'm going to minus the 30. Now, let's see. What's my last step going to be here? Okay, divide by negative 38. Believe it or not, that goes in nice and even. What do I have to do since I divided by a negative? Flip the arrow around. And you're like, oh man, the n's on the right side again. That's not a problem. We're going to switch the n in the negative 3. And I'm going to flip the arrow and turn it the other way. You know the two questions. Open or closed? Open and left. You are. You can absolutely do all this when you put your mind to it. I totally agree. All right, let's find a couple on the back too, and then we should be in good shape here. I don't think I can get all of them in. I'm not playing. Shoot. Okay. All right. 11 kind of looks awful. Let's do 11. All right. Let's see. 11. Like terms. It's all about the like terms. 6 and 4 gets me 10n. Negative 9 plus negative 6 is negative 15. Ooh, now this time I can actually get my n's where I want to. I want them on the left. Undo the positive 10n. And all I've got left to do now is to get my 3n by itself. And just like it seems to happen a lot, when we divide by a negative, and this time, since I already have it on the left, I don't have to do any switching around at all. I flipped my arrow because I divided by a negative. I see with the line under, it's going to be a closed dot. And since my arrow is pointing to the left, that's less than in this case. So I'm going to make my arrow go left. And that's basically it. That's what we're up to with these. Number 7. Okay, we can do number 7. It's not going to be, you've got a whole 8 problems left after this. I think we can handle it. All right, so number 7, distributing first. Get that r by itself by doing the opposite. This time I don't have a negative value, so I'm not going to have to flip my arrow right away here. But if I divide by my 24, that actually goes in evenly.
Wait, doesn't it make sweetness or something?
Well, oh, up here?
Above the 24. On the left side, what does it say?
Negative 144?
Where you're dividing it.
Oh, the minus 48, or this is where this says 24?
What is y'all talking about, man?
To the left.
192.
192?
Okay.
Yeah, my teacher, man.
But again, since my R is on the right side, I'm going to switch them around.
Do we switch it every time?
If my R is on the right instead of the left, because I always want my variables on the left. So if they're on the right, yes, we have to switch them.
Or what is it a negative?
And then, yeah, and if it's a negative, we have to switch them too. And we're going to go to the right. So your job's to finish this one off and then have yourself ready to go with the review for tomorrow.